When Black Sheep Squadron first hit American television screens in 1976, few viewers knew that behind its adrenaline-filled dogfights and rebellious pilots lay a much darker, more complicated truth. The show, centered around the real-life Marine Corps ace Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, wasn't just another war drama. It was a series built on defiance, loss, and the fragile line between heroism and self-destruction. What began as a story of misfit pilots flying through Pacific skies would soon mirror the turbulent lives of the men who inspired and portrayed them. Before the cameras ever rolled, Boyington had already lived through the kind of tragedy that no Hollywood script could fully capture. The real man behind the myth. Before Black Sheep Squadron became a television phenomenon, there was a real man whose life was far more turbulent than anything seen on screen. Gregory "Pappy" Boyington wasn't born into privilege or destiny. He built his legend out of defiance and sheer will. Born on December 4, 1912, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Boyington grew up during a time when aviation was still a daring dream. He studied aeronautical engineering at the University of Washington, where he learned the mechanics of flight before he ever touched the controls of a combat plane. But what truly defined him was not his education. It was his appetite for risk. From the moment he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, Boyington was known as a man who couldn't stand still or follow rules for long. His early years in the military were marked by constant friction with superiors. He questioned orders, pushed limits, and often crossed lines that few others dared to. Yet that same rebellious streak made him an extraordinary pilot. In 1941, before the U.S. entered World War II, Boyington left the Marines to join the American Volunteer Group in China, better known as the Flying Tigers. There, flying missions against Japanese aircraft, he developed the deadly instincts that would later make him a legend. It was also in those skies that he first witnessed the brutal, chaotic side of war, a reality that stripped away all the glamour often attached to military service. When the United States officially joined the war, Boyington returned home, rejoined the Marine Corps, and was assigned command of a struggling unit, the VMF 214 Squadron. It was a group of pilots transferred from various other squadrons, men considered unfit, insubordinate, or unreliable. They were outcasts within the military system, exactly the kind of men Boyington understood. He molded them into what history would remember as the Black Sheep. Under his unpredictable leadership, the squadron achieved remarkable combat success in the Solomon Islands, Munda, and Bougainville campaigns. Within months, they became one of the most feared fighter groups in the Pacific. Boyington claimed 28 confirmed kills, a record that placed him among the top American aces of the war. But behind the victories was a man unraveling. His heavy drinking became both his escape and his curse. Fellow pilots later recalled that Pappy was brilliant in the cockpit but reckless on the ground. On January 3, 1944, during a mission over Rabaul, his luck finally ran out. His plane was hit, and he was captured by Japanese forces. For 20 months, Boyington disappeared into the silence of prisoner-of-war camps. Malnourished, beaten, and isolated, he was presumed dead back home. When he finally returned in 1945, the newspapers called him a hero, but he felt more ghost than man. His post-war life was defined by internal battles. Alcoholism and depression shadowed his every step, and the discipline that had once defined his squadron slipped away in his personal life. Yet even in his decline, Boyington refused to surrender his story to silence. In 1958, he published Ba Ba Black Sheep, not as a tale of triumph, but as an act of truth-telling. The memoir laid bare his contradictions, his anger, pride, and regret, and painted a picture of war stripped of romance. It became one of the most brutally honest accounts ever written by a Marine aviator. Boyington's story was not the story of a perfect soldier. It was the story of a flawed man who turned failure into legend, turning reality into television. When NBC decided to bring Gregory "Pappy" Boyington's story to the screen in the mid-1970s, television was undergoing a dramatic shift. Audiences were growing weary of overly patriotic war stories and were gravitating toward shows that humanized their heroes. Producers Stephen J. Cannell and Philip de Geer saw in Boyington's memoir Ba Ba Black Sheep something that stood apart from the typical war narrative. A story about misfits, not martyrs, about rebellion rather than blind obedience. But adapting a memoir filled with pain, profanity, and personal demons for primetime television was no easy task. NBC executives wanted a show that could balance action with humor, grit with heart. Cannell, already respected for crafting tough but charismatic characters, reimagined Boyington's world as a semi-fictional drama set on a remote South Pacific island. The title, Ba Ba Black Sheep, was chosen to evoke both the real Squadron's nickname and its sense of outsider defiance. Writers drew inspiration from Boyington's wartime experiences, but softened the darker truths. His alcoholism, psychological scars, and occasional volatility were toned down into quirks of a lovable rogue. The network needed a hero that families could root for, not one who reminded them of the broken men returning from Vietnam. Casting the right actor became the defining challenge. The producers wanted someone rugged, credible, and magnetic, a man who could command respect without needing to shout. Robert Conrad, best known for his role in The Wild Wild West, fit that image perfectly, but his off-screen reputation made executives nervous. He had a history of bar fights and a public persona that often bled into his characters. Cannell later admitted that hiring Conrad was a risk that could make or break the entire project. Conrad himself felt a strange connection to Boyington. Both men were headstrong, proud, and misunderstood by authority. Fiction versus reality. Despite its charm, Black Sheep Squadron often blurred the line between history and fiction. The island of Vella La Vella became the fictional Vella La Cava, and most of the pilots, Bob Anderson, Jerry Bragg, and others, were invented for television. The real VMF 214 Squadron was far from the boisterous band of pranksters depicted on screen. In his later interviews, Boyington admitted that his men were often just trying to survive day to day. Historians have since pointed out the show's exaggerated portrayal of the Pacific conflict. Japanese pilots were often faceless, treated more like video game targets than real soldiers. Boyington, too, was romanticized. The TV version turned him into a roguish but noble leader, while in reality he was a man at war with himself, both admired and avoided by those who served under him. Boyington, who made cameo appearances in 3 episodes as General Harrison Kenley, wasn't shy about criticizing the adaptation. Hollywood hokum, he called it. They got the name right, but not the truth. To him, the real story of VMF 214 wasn't about victory. It was about imperfection, about misfits who made history despite being broken. Even so, the series gave his legacy new life. For many Americans, it was the first time they heard of the Black Sheep Squadron. Kids hung model Corsairs from their ceilings, and veterans wrote to NBC saying the show reminded them of their own lost comrades. It was imperfect history, but it was unforgettable television. Turbulence behind the scenes. Life behind the cameras was just as chaotic as the story it told. The show's production faced constant budget cuts and tight shooting schedules. To recreate Japanese Zero fighters, the team modified old T-6 Texan trainer planes, the same ones used in the 1970 film Tora, Tora, Tora. A keen-eyed viewer could spot the differences. The wrong engines, mismatched wings, but the illusion held. Robert Conrad ran the set like a Marine base. Cast members recalled his military-style discipline, arriving early, rehearsing hard, and refusing to tolerate laziness. Some found it inspiring, others found it exhausting. Dirk Blocker, who played Jerry Bragg, once admitted that Conrad didn't just act like a leader, he was one. But tragedy wasn't far away. Red West, who portrayed Sergeant Andy Micklin, had been a close friend and bodyguard to Elvis Presley. When Elvis died on August 16, 1977, West was filming an episode of Black Sheep Squadron. Devastated, he was given the day off to grieve. His loss cast a shadow over the set. Then there was the show's unlikely mascot, Meatball, the bull terrier who became a fan favorite. Few knew that two dogs played the part, one for calm scenes and another for action. The stunt dog, Bounty, was later adopted by a crew member after being written out of the series. These small, personal stories added a layer of humanity to a production that constantly battled time and ratings. The man, the actor, and the legacy. Even after the show ended, Black Sheep Squadron remained a defining chapter in Robert Conrad's life. He continued to act through the 1980s and 90s, but the role of Pappy Boyington haunted him. Like the real Boyington, Conrad carried an air of defiance, a man forever fighting to prove himself. He produced and starred in High Mountain Rangers, 1988, bringing his sons Shane and Christian into the cast and his daughter Joan behind the camera. But by the 2000s, his once iron physique had begun to fail him. His final film credit came in 2002 with Dead Above Ground. Gregory Boyington lived long enough to see himself fade from the spotlight. He died in 1988 at 75, buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Conrad passed in 2020 at 84 from heart failure, survived by 8 children and 18 grandchildren. Their lives, though separated by generations, mirrored each other. Two men marked by strength, rebellion, and quiet regret. Meanwhile, the real VMF 214 Squadron never disappeared. After World War II, they continued to serve in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, evolving with each era of aviation, from F-4U Corsairs to today's F-35B Lightning II jets stationed in Yuma, Arizona. What began as a band of black sheep became one of the most resilient units in the U.S. Marine Corps. The unfinished flight. When fans revisit Black Sheep Squadron today, they often describe a bittersweet sensation, a haunting mix of nostalgia and melancholy. The show may have disappeared from network television in 1978, but its presence still lingers like the sound of a distant engine fading into the clouds. For those who grew up watching Gregory "Pappy" Boyington and his crew of misfit pilots, it wasn't just another war drama. It was a story about imperfection, redemption, and the fragile brotherhood that forms under pressure. The planes, the battles, and the humor were only surface elements. What truly gave the show its heartbeat were the broken men behind those cockpits, soldiers who were more human than heroic, learning how to fight not just the enemy, but their own demons. Boyington himself captured that spirit long before television dramatized it. "We weren't heroes, just survivors of brutal decisions," he once said. That statement transcended his own life. It became the moral compass of the series. The show didn't glorify war, it acknowledged its absurdity. Every sarcastic quip, every argument between the pilots, every mission gone wrong carried a weight of realism beneath the fiction. They laughed because if they didn't, they'd collapse under the burden of fear. That blend of gallows humor and grit made the series stand out from the polished heroics that dominated post-war entertainment. For all its creative liberties, Black Sheep Squadron offered something raw and unfiltered, a glimpse into how history is rewritten by memory. The real VMF 214 Squadron continued long after the cameras stopped rolling, evolving from Corsair propeller planes to F-35B stealth jets. The men who once wore leather jackets and joked about being black sheep became symbols of American perseverance. Yet, as their real-life stories faded into history, the television version became the enduring myth, a mixture of fact, fantasy, and emotion that continues to define how audiences remember them. Even decades later, the show still resonates in reruns and retrospectives on military networks. Younger viewers discover it not as a war story, but as a time capsule of 1970s television, where budget constraints met genuine passion, and where history was retold with both courage and contradiction. It reminds audiences that legends don't have to be perfect to be inspiring. Some are born out of mistakes, stubbornness, and survival. Robert Conrad passed away in 2020, and with him went one of the last living links between Hollywood and Boyington's legend. But the legacy of both men remains inseparable. Two stubborn souls who refused to play by the rules, each in his own arena. Their collaboration, though imperfect, gave the world something unforgettable, a story about what it truly means to be human under fire. Today, when a corsair roars across an air show or an old veteran salutes at a memorial, that echo of the black sheep spirit still endures. It's a legacy that doesn't need medals or monuments to survive, just memory. And for every fan who still hums the theme tune, Black Sheep Squadron continues its flight, unfinished yet eternal, a testament to flawed heroes who dared to fly against the wind. For you, what was the most unforgettable part of Black Sheep Squadron? The real-life story of Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, the tension behind the scenes, or the lasting legacy of VMF 214? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories from television history.